Hi, this is Jeff Smith from Airbus Defence and Space. My title is Head of Connectivity for Unmanned Aerial Systems, and more predominantly I've been focused on the Zephyr platform, which I'm going to share a bit more of an insight with you today, and how we strongly believe that we've got a very good value proposition for being able to connect those unconnected people in more rural and remote locations around the world. So I'll tell you a little bit about the aircraft, its dimensions and weight, which are always quite interesting, but more about what we think the addressable market is and how we think we can solve these issues and problems, and the ones that are yet to be overcome. So let's start. I'll move through. So the connectivity market today, as we see it, and if you look at how many people around the world, there's about 4 billion people that are defined as being unconnected or underconnected. So you're either on the edge of terrestrial coverage and you have very patchy, often intermittent signals for your LTE device or mobile handset, or you're actually in a completely remote location where there is no use of terrestrial cellular technology for connectivity. And the only thing options available to you are probably satellite links, which can be, pretty expensive sometimes, depending on the location and the users on the ground. So we believe we've got this platform. The HAPS itself stands for High Altitude Pseudo Satellite. And because of the height it flies at, it's about 20 to 22 kilometers in the air. You have a very, very large footprint below you where you can cover. So that's why the graphic in front of you sort of says that one HAPS can cover the same area as 250 traditional telecoms towers. Now that doesn't mean it can have the throughput and power to serve what 250 cell towers would actually do, obviously. It really is a case that it can serve a massive footprint and therefore makes it economically viable because you can hit a large population even though the population density per square kilometer may be fairly low. So that's quite key when we talk about this, because no one's going to do this for free. We're all here to make money, obviously, in the commercial marketplace. And so having that large footprint really, really assists in that. We believe there's a very, very large value. 3.9 trillion is the estimate that we've seen around, all of the different mobile technologies around the world that could potentially be addressed. But we have many, many applications that the HAPS platform can be used for. So I'll talk a little bit more about those. Before I get onto that though, this is kind of the technology bricks. If you think about what we've had to do to develop this kind of capability, there's main eight key areas that we talk about. You've got the avionics, which is the control on board the aircraft. You've got the airframe itself, which is extremely unique in the world today, being unmanned and solar powered. It has to be extremely light. We have mission control that obviously makes sure that you can manage, operate, and fly these in a safe way in any part that may be required for services. You have to very, very carefully manage your power, and therefore battery technology is extremely critical alongside the solar array technology that we use, because the aircraft literally stays up in the stratosphere. We've got some stats I'll share with you later, but it stays up there for many, many days. And so your batteries need to be extremely lightweight and technologically advanced. We have flight control, obviously, we have to think about, and that comes down to the environment and weather, which we do a lot of significant research and mapping of before we fly in any areas. The payload itself is what is the key to unlocking the service capability. So the payloads can be varied. Obviously, today I'm talking about direct-to-device connectivity payload, but we have things like backhaul payloads. We have obviously Earth observation, which is another area that we use the aircraft for. And then we have very critically an operations center and launch and recovery site locations. So behind all of the technology you see in the aircraft are all of these areas we have to cover. And at the moment, we are prototyping, we're flying, we learn, and then we continue that cycle with industrialized platforms coming out very, very shortly. The next part is just to sort of give you a bit of a background, and we've added to these numbers a little bit over the past year or so, and we'll continue to do so. We've set 3 world records. We have flown for 5 times longer than any other UAV. We've had 12 flight campaigns so far, and we've flown for at least 25 days in the stratosphere. So no one has actually achieved that yet. We welcome, there's a lot of people in the world, competitors that are trying to develop and operate similar capabilities, but we're still proud to hold that record. So the high altitude platform station, or the Zephyr platform itself, we believe that we have a very, very unique gap that we can complement satellite and other lower level drones and manned mission aircraft. We are extremely wide reach. So when I talk about the platform at the altitude it sits, obviously not as high as a satellite, but extremely high. When you compare it to commercial aircraft, we're twice as high, and obviously lower level drones. We can be over an area for a very long duration. So that means you've got extremely good coverage, whether it's for observation or for connecting mobile users on the ground. Very flexible and scalable. So as you can see, the aircraft has 2 electric propulsion systems with the propellers. We can travel up to about 1,000 nautical miles a day in any direction once we're in the stratosphere. So when you're up there, we can be redeployed, which means that you can cover an area, and if there was potentially a disaster recovery situation, a loss of infrastructure, either through natural disaster or any kind of other action, we could obviously use these aircraft to redeploy and cover an area, maybe temporarily until the terrestrial network came back up. Likewise, they can be deployed for events such as sporting or large festivals or music gatherings or political rallies, all sorts of things where you may need additional coverage for a short duration. So very, very flexible. Obviously, it can sit up there, and we typically fly in a figure of 8 when we're doing this, so that you can remain over the area below and provide those sorts of services. So drilling down a bit more into those, I've spoken about persistence. The long period of time where you can stay over an area is extremely valuable for many applications. Obviously, when we're talking about connectivity, if you're going to look at a long-term solution for connecting the unconnected, you want to make sure it's something that's going to be there and offer high availability. So working up to sort of 95 to 99% availability is possible with a fleet of HAPS aircraft over a specific area. So you may choose to offer either increased throughput for a certain set of users. Maybe you've got enterprise customers on the ground, or primary industry like mining or gas and oil, and they need dedicated links down to them. That can be offered from the aircraft. Likewise, your consumer users like you and I, when you walk along with your mobile phone, because of the payloads that are being developed at the moment, and it's a really exciting area to see what's coming out with LTE and 4G right now for HAPS applications, but obviously 6G will be a future consideration as well. It just means that it's seamless. This is, in the simplest analogy, it is a flying cell tower. So there should be very, very low level of awareness, if any at all, for a user on the ground. Let's say if you're going from a terrestrial tower onto a HAPS based service, it should be a seamless experience for the end user. It's very, very low detectably in the stratosphere, so with conventional methods, and that obviously lends itself more to maybe military applications potentially, but extremely flexible and very, very low latency compared to higher altitude Earth observation or satellite communication. So it complements that as well as more of a near real-time type service. And just to expand on that a bit further, so obviously if you look at satellite-based services, even low Earth orbit, obviously you have massive global coverage, of really, really large footprint to the ground. And your satellite imagery today is probably around the 50 centimeter resolution, which is still really, really good. So, if you're a fan of looking on Google Maps and Google Earth, obviously you see a slightly lower level resolution than that. And you can typically get 50 to 100 megabits of bandwidth from a low Earth orbit satellite. Those are going to be increasing over time with technology, absolutely. But then you have the HAPS platform and the Zephyr that we have today obviously has that wide reach, real-time service capability. From an Earth observation perspective, probably 18, 20 centimeter resolution is possible. But we can also do cellular direct to device, which is really key. It's a unique capability that you can offer from a HAPS platform versus satellite. And then the low Earth area, obviously more specific local coverage, maybe more generic, maybe more short term, and maybe 5G or other service types can be deployed from low Earth, closer to the ground. So when we look at the use case for connectivity, if we start on the left, I mean, we're talking about the fact that a mobile network operator and or the app providers and higher level service offerings, maybe for content distribution, they all want to connect as much of the marketplace globally as they can, obviously for a commercial benefit. But there's also government drivers behind this. Having a population which can't use the internet, they are at a distinct disadvantage. The internet provides all sorts of benefits from healthcare, education, remote learning, business, mobility, all sorts of benefits that having your population connected will absolutely improve GDP, and it's been proven many times by a lot of independent bodies with reports. So client objectives from our perspective are they want to increase market share, absolutely, but they also need to make sure that they're growing revenues, and they need to meet regulatory obligations. And that comes to the point where sometimes if you get a license in a country to build out to all the high population urban and high density areas, the obligation on you is you need to also provide coverage to the rural population. And that comes at a very high price sometimes. So for you to benefit from having that spectrum allocation as a mobile network operator, you probably need to figure out how you're going to connect the rural and unconnected folks in that country. So the technical issues behind that obviously are it's extremely expensive to build out terrestrial infrastructure, and especially the more so you get into the remote regions. Sometimes the terrain and remote locations are very, very inaccessible. That could be a seasonal thing, or it could be just the geography. And then also alternative solutions cannot always deliver direct-to-device services. So you end up having to think about additional equipment like terminals, dongles, maybe other sleeves for mobile phones to fall into to operate other service types. So our solution is really, you put an appropriate payload onto the HAPS platform. We're currently working with many MNOs around the world and partner organizations to look at, firstly, the business model. So is this something that is attractive and can be commercially viable in the markets they want to target? And that comes down to many items such as population density, the average rental per user that the population is expected to pay, any government subsidies that may be required. But what we can do is effectively turn this into an OPEX model versus CAPEX heavy. So that's an extremely attractive approach to this. It means that we can obviously work alongside MNOs and either with our partner companies or elsewhere and work to grow that revenue together. So if we can cover a very large area, it may be that over time your market penetration grows, the user throughput and experience needs to improve. Therefore, we could deploy additional platforms to answer those challenges and problems that we're trying to solve. The best thing is existing handsets can still be utilized today, so there's no need for additional equipment on the ground. And many of the developing nations that we're looking at, the handset lifespan is far greater than in the Western world, where it may only be 18 months or 2 years. So 5 or 7 year old technology is still deployed. We need to think about that when we cater for the service types. And it will interwork with the terrestrial network infrastructure. So a feeder link from the aircraft down to the terrestrial infrastructure, maybe 200 or 300 kilometers in distance away from the aircraft, can be provided so that you can link it into the terrestrial footprint. But there's a market out there. I mean, it's obviously worth billions of euros a year. Slowly it's getting taken up, but we believe this is a 15 to 20 year at least potential business solution here. It may even be more permanent than that in the longer term until more technology and advancements and innovations come along. So we have the capacity to serve this marketplace, and we are, we think we're fairly unrivaled in the persistence stakes today, and we have that solution that can be used. So the spot that we believe we are filling in is that piece between terrestrial and satellite. So when you get down to only maybe 1, 2, or 3 people per square kilometer, even a HAPS service, if that was what was in your entire footprint, you would really struggle to make that a commercially viable service. And that's where probably satellite has to play a role, you know, maybe up to the 10 or 15 even people per square kilometer. But where we've looked at anything from the sort of 10, 15 up to 80, 100 people per square kilometer, it really is a sweet spot for what we've designed. As the weight of payloads increases and the capability of the aircraft increases over time, obviously we'll be able to serve probably even more dense locations, and even for short duration you could serve them straight away. But there's a marketplace out there for HAPS platforms, definitely. So from a connectivity specific perspective, obviously there's low Earth orbit satellites, which we absolutely complement, and there are balloons out there offering very, very similar services, and we complement those as well. Because when you look through coverage, latency, persistence, availability, a hybrid type approach with balloons and fixed wing is absolutely critical, because balloons, as you know, they can control their altitude. They may be able to control their location from a lateral perspective in the future with some small propulsion capabilities, but right now they have to rely on extremely complex and very well developed environmental weather and mapping technology, so that they can make sure the balloons resolve you know, a connectivity area on the ground. Whereas with the HAPS platform being fixed wing and having its own propulsion, we can stay persistent over an area. So I think there's going to be some hybrid applications and uses of balloons and fixed wing together in the future. When it comes to the obviously latency, balloons and HAPS platforms, fixed wing, both are very, very similar, quite low latency, very much compared to low Earth orbit satellites, which obviously has applications for real time, such as video or voice and telephony calls. And then the ability to flexibly deploy and have a scalable solution as well is an extreme advantage for the fixed wing aircraft. As long as you've got the production facilities and volume and they're distributed around the locations in the world where you want to operate, we can get an aircraft airborne very, very quickly. And it can be redeployed, as I said before, to any area within 1,000 nautical miles per day. So it gives you long, capable reach. And pricing wise, obviously, I think it's fairly competitive, but because we're talking about a very innovative solution in its early years, you know, this hasn't been widely adopted yet. So therefore, you know, prices over time will come down. It will alter and change the marketplace, but that's when volumes and more innovative technology and approaches come into play. And the other benefit is obviously we can offer backhaul point-to-point solutions as well as direct-to-device solutions today. So this is my last slide, and this is really talking about all of the different applications. It's a lot of information on here to take in, but if I can use my mouse, I think you can see that on the screen. So if I talk about launch and recovery, obviously when we're going up to the stratosphere, that's about an 8 or 9 hour exercise typically to reach the stratosphere. And once up there, we can then be deployed to any task. This one here is really talking about maybe secure cell communications and connectivity, which could be used for private enterprise, potentially military applications. You then have this application here, which is illustrating a fleet of HAPS platforms. And you can see here we have inter-HAPS links. So these would be point-to-point links, basically creating a full mesh network in the sky, potentially backed up by some beyond line of sight mission control communications to satellites. That's how we operate our aircraft. So once it's out of sight, we use that kind of data link to control the aircraft fleet positioning and the services on board. And then you also see here a feeder link coming down to a cellular terrestrial network. And this is where you could integrate. So via daisy chaining these services, you could offer services into, you know, many, many locations and different coverage areas. And then obviously also illustrating the flexibility in retasking. You have an aircraft over here, maybe providing some kind of maritime support or surveillance. And obviously there's so many other applications. It can be for border patrol, security and observation. We're seeing great interest from wildfire management and prediction and control. If an aircraft could be deployed, you know, in California or in Queensland, in Australia, where we've had such terrible fires in the past few years, with infrared technology, camera technology, and communications, it could be extremely beneficial to those government departments that are trying to fight those incidents happening. So that, in a nutshell, is really where we believe we've got a very, very strong case with the high altitude platform. We typically go through a 4-stage engagement with most of our MNOs. The first one is always business modeling. Second one is technical feasibility. So understanding, you know, the payload requirements, the footprint, the market, and the user expectations. And then that normally leads to a payload development of some kind if there isn't one already available, where we jointly work on that. And then we go through pilot and testing phasing before an entry into service is reached in a future date. So at the moment, we are working closely with many MNOs and partner organizations to develop and test and prove these services. And there's some exciting developments that are coming in the near future. So we'd love to share those with you in the future. And that is everything from myself. So thank you very much for your time. If you have any questions, I know that you'll be able to send those through on the day. And if we can be there live, that'd be great. If not, we can respond to those separately. So thank you very much.